I did a bit better. Whoa, that is cool. It is recording. Like I just said, welcome to anybody who is watching this afterwards. Okay, so what is it like to live in a post-truth world? Well, we live in a post-truth world now, but in the late medieval era, they also lived in a post-truth world where their truth was defined by the community they lived in, not by whether something was objectively true or false. That was irrelevant to their life. So we're going to investigate people whose lives were actually not that very different to ours today. How far would you go to defend the truth? At what point do you snap and go, nope, not doing it like that anymore? And what is the biblical basis for any of this? Well, Phil and I hope that by the end of this course, you will thoroughly understand the 5 solas of the Reformation. You have to wait and find out what some of them are, if you don't already know. And that you'll be able to defend your faith thoroughly and be absolutely convinced of your salvation in Jesus Christ. And you will know just how far you're prepared to go and nail your colours to the mast and sail forward, spreading the gospel. That is what we really hope. So we're looking forward to this very exciting course. My next thing was open in prayer, but we've just done that so ably with Andrew. So we might just walk right through. And Phil and I are going to tell you why we are interested in Reformation Church history. And then we're going to ask you guys why you'd like to be here. It's perfectly okay to say, because I need to finish the unit to get the piece of paper. We're all understanding if you do. So Phil, why are you interested in Reformation Church history? And you get to come and talk into this exciting camera.
Yeah. I've always been interested in the Reformation, been interested in how such a massive shift happened, not just in Christianity, but also in world history, and what it did to nations and what it did to the understanding of the Christian faith. In my studies at Bible College, I've been very interested in church history, and in my last degree, I focused a lot on subjects around the Reformation of the 16th century. So I'm just really interested in it and love to just keep studying it. And even as I do this and read some bits in Unit 1, I'm coming across things that, that slipped through the net if I've learned it before, and I'm learning it afresh now. So I'm looking forward to learning more as I do this course with all of you.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Well, about 10 years ago, I was lucky enough to be given a tour of Balliol College by a family connection and the porter of Balliol, who was a very important person because they hold the keys to the college and they can also stop the traffic. And that's why I'm about to tell you this. As we were walking around and the porter was proudly talking about all the different famous people who'd been to Balliol College in Oxford, my friend said, oh, and she's an evangelical Christian. And he said, oh, in that case, you want to come and see where Ridley and Latimer and Cranmer were burnt at the stake. And I was like, oh, I'm sure I would. So we go outside into the high and he stops all of the traffic so that in the middle of the road, I can stand there and look at a stone cross inlaid in just a street. And there was a plaque. Here, Latimer, Ridley and Cranmer were burnt at the stake, setting a light that would last through. You will find out more about what Latimer said. But we are going to set a light that is going to set this kingdom on fire for Jesus. And I had to say, I have absolutely no idea who these people are. And my family connection to me said, call yourself a Christian, get a grip. I thought I'd better find out. And I have no qualifications in history. My degree is actually in science. So I'm the sort of person who is interested in truth and to discover a world where truth was unimportant, to find out that people were so keen on the gospel that they would go to be burnt at the stake, knowing that the truth of this would spread throughout basically the whole world after that. It was really enlightening for me to see how far people would go. And that's why I got interested in Reformation Church history. I am here as a history nerd, an amateur like probably everybody else in the room who does not have a theological or a history degree, I'm not theologically or historically trained, but I do love primary sources. I love to get out my Luther and read some Luther. I like to read things as much as I can in the original, and hopefully I might inspire you with a bit of love for that too. Our best primary source, though, our best original source, is the Bible. So let's find out why you guys are here. So should we start on this end? Please say your name and tell us what you want to study.
Well, first of all, I want to finish my PTC. But no, it's not more than that, because I actually like history and I am a history graduate.
Marvellous.
But I don't know if anybody else did the New South Wales history course in the 1960s. I did in school.
I couldn't.
You didn't, but
Great by then.
I can tell you the second year course was, we started off with the Renaissance, then we did the Reformation. So it's been in my psyche for a long, long time. And I'm really fascinated with the link between the Reformation and the Renaissance and the growth of the individual, because I don't really think it's a fluke that it happened then. I think there's significantly that finally had people, for various reasons, mainly because of the power of the printing press, that the individual got a voice in the church. And it's a significant point that you couldn't stop Martin Luther because of the printing press.
Well, I think you're going to have a ball doing this course.
It's interesting.
It is. It's going to be
Because he really used the printing press. It's like somebody using the internet today.
Well, we are going to really have a great time with some of that next week.
There are lots of reasons, but I think it's fascinating.
Fantastic. And
okay, my name's Tony. Yeah, I'm interested in church history generally, or history generally, but church history in particular. That's just sort of been a love of mine as well. I mean, I'm no historian or anything like that. I don't have a degree or anything like that, and those kind of subjects, BA in sociology, that type of thing. But I've always been interested in the church history and the Reformation, early church history, especially the Reformation. And I agree with you about the individual. I think as the printing of the Bible, which actually allow people to read it there on their own, make up their own ideas.
Priesthood of all believers.
we're going to definitely be covering that topic a lot.
And the fact that
In fact, after we've gone around and found out who we all are and got to introduce ourselves, we're going to be having a little look at what we already know. Yeah. And
I'm Joan. I started my PTC in 2008. And when it got to a point where I had to finish the whole lot in about 18 months, 2 years, I'd done 12 units. I said, blow that, I'm not an essay writer, I'm a mathematician, right? So when it came up now, the fact that you can do the exams online and it's a lot easier. I did it all by myself. I did not have a tutor. I had nobody. I just did it by myself, and I'm really enjoying this group. I've got 3 books at home that my husband had when he did Reformation History at uni at UNSW. The print on one of them is that 5 point, something like that. It's very small, so I haven't looked at them. Okay, so I'm here doing my good things. Yeah.
wonderful. And Helen.
Yeah, I'm Helen. I'm finishing off doing the PTC that I've done along as well. But I did quite enjoy the history course we did before, the early church history.
Yes,
I'm looking forward to this one. Not because I really understood it at all, but you know, it's because history is kind of outside of my area and it's just kind of names and things. But I too like to travel, and I too have stood 2 years ago at that same spot at Oxford, and it is wonderful when you can start putting a little bit more background around those places. So like when I was in Turkey last year, I thought, oh yeah, Cappadocia. I'm seeing the things that we talked about in early church history. So I'm looking forward to putting a bit more meat around. What skeleton I have, Reformation.
I'm Alan. I started PTC back in the early 80s. I had no intention of completing it. I'm here because I'm interested in history. I sat in on the early church history, and this is an obvious follow. I want to gain the historical background to what we currently believe. I think that's important for for any, well, certainly for me. That's kind of
Something I left out.
kind of why, you know, it's interesting to know what's led us to the point we're at now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I cherry pick what I want to do. I'm not that fussed on some of the other subjects, but there are two that I'm particularly interested in. Right? And I'd get in trouble if I didn't come tonight. Because of all else.
Yes, I'm Jackie, and like Alan, I started PTC back in 1988. Did 3 subjects and 3 children. It was just too much to do. So
Life got in the way.
life got in the way. So started back again. Was it 3 years ago, Helen? I think we did. And I loved early church history because I knew nothing about it.
I know.
And so I'm really looking forward to the Reformation because I kind of know little bits and pieces, but I want to learn the whole bit about Reformation, how we came to believe what we did, how they managed to, not convince, but how they managed to sideline the Catholic Church so that we could get the truth.
Mark.
G'day, I'm Mark. I happen to be married to Vanessa. I love history. I just
thought you said you
love
loved Vanessa.
I love history, and I particularly was into the Renaissance, and it always was. It was just the birth of new ideas. That's all I kept saying whenever they taught me. If you look at history, it actually says that the Renaissance started in 1420 in Italy, 1420-ish, and it says exactly the same thing it does about the Reformation. It was all about the rise of the new humanist thought. Defined back then meant looking at the primary sources and trying to understand this incredible wealth of history that has been forgotten about. You know, all the Roman stuff, basically. And yeah, if you like, the Renaissance and the Reformation is from the same drivers. And you can see without looking for truth, no one could do anything, Renaissance or Reformation. So I'm enthused. I said I was married to Vanessa. If I didn't do this course, I'd still learn it anyway. Because my wife is an academic vortex, just sucks you in with enthusiasm. You might be trying to sleep and you'll hear, oh my goodness, look, and some relevant point comes out. You hear it whether you're awake or asleep. So why not join?
Might as well get the certificate for it.
Yeah, not much of a student. I'm not a student.
I'm Luke. I've done quite a few PT subjects, but I'm just interested in learning more about history. This is a very important moment in the church. It's a good follow on from I've done the early church history subject, and sort of interested in learning more about this period of time.
It's interesting that several people said I did early church history, now I'll do the Reformation. I think that's really cool.
For a moment, I also did what was called the prayer book. I think it's now called worship.
There's separate ones, there's 2 different ones.
Are they?
Yeah.
Well, I did the prayer book, and that obviously told me a lot about what happened in the English church and why the prayer book and how it was structured. Yes, so finding out a bit more about the background of that's good.
Yes, we are going to be covering some of those things with Phil, in fact, our resident expert. So Luke is here also pursuing the history rabbit down the rabbit hole. This is very cool. Rebecca.
Yes, I'm Rebecca. Look, I don't know why exactly this particular unit seemed to grab me, but I think it's probably the understanding why we do things the way we do now and like how we got to be here, like, you know, with the history of how things have happened in the church. Yeah, I like to understand the reason behind things, so I think that's part of it. Yeah, it's just growing more understanding of yeah, basically how we act out what the Bible says and how that's changed over time. So yeah, see what happens.
Thanks.
When I was a small child, at school, from school, my mother told me how boring history was and how irrelevant it was to life. And so I went through the rest of my schooling without doing any history. And as a result, I really didn't know the difference between the Reformation and the Renaissance, or when they happened. And I'm liking the idea of finding out.
Great.
That sounds really good.
Okay.
Ruth, I'm just dropped in. But yeah, a little bit like you, Rebecca, I'm curious. I mean, the Bible didn't stop back with the disciples and the apostles. You know, the torch has been carried on throughout history. How was it carried out? What happened during that time? Seeking the truth as that torch has been handed on through the generations, and how does that impact here and now? So onward, upward.
Fantastic. And Lewis,
I'm picking up on the.
the question is, who are you? Of course, we know you're Lewis. And why would you like to do this course?
Well, I'm getting confirmation that the 10:30 Glenbrook service is the right service, and the Reformation background will reinforce that.
You know.
Oh, come on. That's stunned.
Sorry, no,
Who are
that's a
you?
joke,
Yeah.
that's a joke, isn't it?
You
Sorry,
can't-
that's a joke.
I haven't noticed you at our service.
It's not
Okay.
the only 10
I know,
around, is it?
Anyway, look, I'm part of a great group of people that we've been carrying the PTC course through. Reformation is certainly a great period that I look forward to, delving into, and it's a great journey.
Right, well, that's fantastic. We're going to just do a small amount of housekeeping now. So Phil is going to explain to you how we are planning to do our timetable.
Sure. Okay.
Yes, and then Helen's going to talk to us about books. She doesn't know this yet, but she already knew this was going to happen. It must have been obvious. So, yeah.
So today is like a lesson 0. It's a get acquainted with the topic, know what we're doing, and then we will have a deeper look at Unit 1 next week. The way that we were thinking we might tackle the weeks is each week we'll have a part where we look back at what you read during the week. So the idea is this week you'll read through Unit 1 and get acquainted with the readings for that week. And then next week we'll look back and we'll discuss it together. These groups are mainly for not the teaching of the subject, but the discussion of the subject, so that we can hone our understanding of what we've looked at, and bounce off each other, learn from each other, and really come out with a greater understanding of what we're covering. Also, each week we'll do a looking forward. We'll get a bit of a taster of what you're going to read in the week ahead, so that you know what you're going to tackle. We can maybe highlight some things to look out for. We can have like a little pre-discussion, any questions, and then during that week you'll head in. You'll read the next unit, and then again the following week we'll look back at that. So it's a bit of that. And Vanessa and I are mostly alternating units, and so on a typical week, I might facilitate the looking back, and Vanessa will facilitate the looking forward. So we'll do it that way. Hopefully that's a way that will help us all get the most from this course. And yeah, so what I've done is I've put together 2 options for this course, the structure of the
we've been
course.
given until a date in May to get all of the units in that space.
Yep.
Yes, and in between that time we have Easter, school holidays, and my wedding anniversary holiday, which of course is very important.
Yeah.
Yes.
Day.
Yeah.
Oh, Mother's
Oh, and
Day.
we've got
We've
lift
Mother's
here.
Day. Yeah.
We
So
also have the AGM the church.
Yep, true.
We weren't given a date for that.
It's
Right.
in March, isn't it?
It's
Okay.
in March, yeah.
It's in March.
So
Okay.
one of-
So
Okay.
there'll be some tinkering with this, you know,
Well, bunches.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just give you our two options, I
Yeah.
think.
The main difference in the options is on the 6th of April, Vanessa's going to be away. And so we're thinking we could do a mid course refresh and just have a discussion about what we've covered so far and just catch up on where we're up to. Or we can just continue on and I'll do 2 weeks in a row looking at the English Reformation, which is, it's not what I'm an expert at, but it's my hobby horse. It's what I particularly like in regards to the Reformation.
You are going to get both weeks with Phil anyway on those 2 weeks, whichever one we choose,
Yeah.
because that's his area of expertise. So
Yeah.
he's going to be doing both of them, and I'll be doing the last 2.
And then we've got school holidays after that week. I didn't actually look at what day was actually Easter this year.
20th.
20th of April.
Okay, that's good. That's part of the
Okay.
school
Right,
holidays.
it's right in the
Holidays,
middle of the
yes.
holidays.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, I'm going to a baptism at Grafton Cathedral.
Right, so this is not taking into account the annual general meeting because nobody gave us the date for that.
Yeah.
We were given the timetable. So would you prefer to have a week up our sleeves, which you might need to end up spending on the annual general meeting? Week by the side?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yes.
thought, in the past, we have actually met on the first and last Sunday of the school holidays and just missed out on that middle one, if that helps.
Sometimes you've just not got enough weeks to get
Yeah.
through by the time you take out Father's Day, Mother's Day, all those. Get through the things, but
So that would be the 13th and the 27th of April, which is the first Sunday and the last Sunday.
have you
I think
scheduled
we already
that
had
in?
the 27th
Oh,
down
we've already got
to on
27th
anyway,
on.
yeah, so we
Yeah.
could add the 13th in.
Yeah.
Is anybody going to be away in the school holidays?
Oh, yeah,
Probably.
but not on the weekends.
No.
I'll be away at the end of March.
I may not be here that day.
Yeah, it's 13th. Yeah. You could do the 6th. Yeah. Okay, we shall just,
This is a
this
draft.
is a draft,
I'll give it out anyway.
and we shall, this draft,
Yeah.
but when adding in a couple of things that,
This at least will give you an idea of the way we look at the topic. So there's a review and a preview. Thank you for sharing, because I didn't print enough out for. No, yes, I did. I did print out. So one side's just the alternative plan.
and stay tuned to the new plan, which will appear shortly. Now, Helen, would you just like to give us an update on the books, please?
Okay, yeah. So the people who registered by Friday, have been registered with Moore College and have online access, but no books yet because I couldn't get them this weekend. But they should be here for next weekend. So I will do another registration this week to pick up the people who hadn't registered by Friday and any other new people who want to register. And I'll probably do that on Thursday. So if you'd like a book, but you're just sitting in on the course, then if you can let me know by Thursday, I can also order the book to come. And it'll be whatever it says, 22 or 23, is it? Yeah. And you can't pay that online like everyone else who's registering because it's just not set up to do that. So if you just put it in an envelope, give it to me, I'll give it to Howard. So the church will pay up front and then we'll give that. So I think there's a couple more people who are planning to come under that sort of method next week.
So just to remind everybody, we aren't really here to help you get the highest mark you can in the exam.
What?
I will give you my tips.
Yep.
Right, I will happily give you my tips on how to study and how to get high marks in the exam. But we are here to explore the concepts and to apply them and to help you guys to facilitate your discussion to explore and apply them. So for the people who are sitting in, you're not really missing anything, but we will be giving in things, for example, suggesting that you go home and do the quiz practices, especially if you're going to be doing the exam. because the exam is a multiple choice based on a very large pool, and the quizzes for each unit draw from that pool. And then in the exam, if you've done it before, you'll know you get your 60 questions from the pool, which cover across all of the different areas. I'll tell you one that I got if you want to know. But I don't know if they're the same every time, but
Yeah.
make sure you read, heads up, make sure you read the introduction preface. I got a question on that.
And you can do the quiz multiple times.
You
can't
can do multiple quizzes. It will
So-
just keep on giving you
Different
quizzes.
questions.
It's a great way to get to know the course really well. Even if you're not planning to do the exam, get online and do those quizzes because it really helps you firm up the content. And they're the sort of really annoying multiple choice quiz that is like, is it A, is it B, is it A and B? Is it A and B and D but not C? You know, someone with a science background did that. They're just like, this just triggers university all over for me. Right.
And if you do the quiz and you've got questions there that you just weren't getting, or you only got after trying it a few times and trying all the other options, and you want to discuss it, bring it and discuss it as part of the review of that week, and that we can discuss it as a group.
So we're hoping that the looking back section that will start every session will be the questions you guys bring, saying, I just don't understand the difference between mysticism and monasticism, or whatever it might be. And we will very happily unpack all of those things with you.
In terms of the Unit 1 readings, I've printed off a copy for those that haven't got a book yet. So I'll give them out in a moment. And they're not formatted fantastically because I've basically had to copy it across to a different program and then try and space it out. So bear with it for this week. When you get the books, you'll admire the way they've formatted it in there. Much better. So I'll give these out and then you can take these and read Unit 1. There we go. Take one, pass it on.
So at the end of every looking forward section, we're likely to say, make sure you do the exercise or whatever. Now, some of those exercises involve readings out of the Moore College Library that are linked online from the New International Dictionary of the Christian Church. We've got there are plenty of these around New Bible Dictionary. Some of them will be related to that. They're found in the church office, but that other particular book, the readings are linked in your online component. If you're sitting in, you've got the book and you haven't done it, that's okay. We're not going to be, quizzing people on what did they say about William of Ockham in the New International Dictionary of the Christian Church or anything like that. But if you do have the online best, go and have a look at those readings. They just really firm up what you've learnt in the book. It's not new content, it's more in-depth content. Any questions about the style? Because we're going to ask you about your learning styles next, and then we're going to find out what we know.
I just thought, just at the end of each week, we're aiming to look at the topics over about an hour, and then have about half an hour at the end for if you want to discuss it, if you want to get started on the next unit with someone and actually do it together. But also we'll bring some books and you can come and have a look at some resources as well. But that's generally the end of each week is a bit of a free time to discuss a topic, discuss something you didn't want to discuss in the group, anything like that.
Yes, it'll be ask us anything, talk about any particular thing you're having, use our Bible dictionary, come and have a look at the library, much of which is filtered from Ken, so we must be nice to it. Come and do some readings, do some extra reading. Of course, we might go over time, so we will try very hard to make sure you get your reading question-free study time. I know some people like studying with other people around. Learning styles. Yeah. Do tell us what sort of things do you like? How do you like to learn? Lewis, you're looking at me. You made eye contact. How do you like to learn?
Look, visual stuff is always helpful for me. So whether it's a timeline, key points, that type of stuff, that can always be a good prompt. It probably sort of reflects also the early church history stuff where you were trying to get a sense of whether this person fit in the scheme of things and what was it, the key issues that they were grappling with, that type of stuff. So I'm a bit of a flowchart type person at times. So right.
Well, a preview of what we're going to try and do each week is actually have a timeline. So I saw some butcher's paper down there. We're just going to do a timeline and add things to it each week. And so hopefully that will, by the end of the course, we'll have a pretty full timeline. We'll spread it out a bit because it's only covering a certain period of time, not centuries and centuries, and also a concept board. So terms and things that we want to just put up there and discuss, you know, what do they mean? And so that we can refer back to them. Anything that gets put up on the board, I'll take a photo of, and we'll be able to email to the group so that you've got the mind maps we do and anything that gets put up there. And the timeline will just get put up every week as an ongoing project for all of us.
Rebecca, you made eye contact with me.
I think visual, but I don't mind like auditory things as well, like just listening.
Right, there's a few other things going around as well. For example, John Dixon has a podcast series called Undeceptions. He is an ex-academic historian who is also an Anglican minister from Macquarie University. He's currently at Wheaton College, and he has a two-part series on the Reformation, which is a great heads up if you like podcasting. It's there's some advertising. It's, you know, good, decent Christian advertising. It really annoys me, but you know, it will actually give you a bit of an overall. If you're a auditory learner, it will actually give you some heads up on some of the big picture stuff of what we're doing. Yeah.
What's it called?
Undeceptions. And it's called, I think, Reformation Part 1 and Part 2.
Yeah, you have to go back in the podcast.
Yeah, you have to go back and find it. It was to do with the anniversary that was a couple of years ago. Yeah, Helen, you just looked at me.
I did, didn't I?
Yes.
So I quite enjoy listening to things and much, you know, I do like visuals and things like that too, but I find that, you know, when I read or even when I listen, I just kind of superficially go over the top. So I really like being in the group and hearing people who actually ask questions. So I think, oh yeah, I didn't really understand that either, but you know, it didn't sort of trigger a question for me, but when somebody else does, it's helpful.
Yeah, we're certainly hoping to have very discussion oriented. We're seeing this as a tutorial style. You'll go and read your stuff like a university tutorial. You'll come back and we will discuss what you've done and give you the heads up for next time you go away and read it, and then we'll come back and discuss it. If you haven't done your reading, someone's going to be checking, but you'll have a lot more fun if you do. Anyone else like to share anything else about learning styles before we hit our first mind map?
One thing I was going to ask is, I usually, when it comes to a course like history like this, I'd like to check out other sources of information too, besides the book.
Yeah.
And so I'll go online, for instance, see what's out there on Reformation. But I was wondering if this recommendation, because there's lots of stuff out there on Reformation. So I was wondering if there's a recommendation, what sort of YouTube videos or something like that you would recommend as being good information, and they know what they're talking about.
Yes, now in the back of the book, you'll find a recommended reading list. Unfortunately, the Osman book is not available. I have tried to get it. I don't know anyone who owns it, and I haven't been able to obtain it. It's very old. We have got a bunch of different stuff here for reading. It's not the only reading. These boxes over here also, if you're interested in borrowing anything. So Oxford University, this is their basic first year theology textbook. It has some basic stuff out of that. They have an entire textbook just on the Reformation by the same guy, which is one of the recommended readings, McGrath, whatever his name was. Sorry, Alistair McGrath. It's also one of the recommended readings of the course, and you'll find those recommended readings in the back of the book. But in terms of if you just enjoy watching documentaries and YouTube things, there's some link to the John Dixon Undeceptions podcast, which interestingly also has a Catholic YouTuber who also is going through the Reformation. You watch him and you think, mate, like, I know the Catholic Church has changed a lot, but get a grip. Like, he's actually saying, and this is why this was so good, and this is why. This is not a come and hate Catholic session. The Catholics also had the Reformation, right? It's not an us and them. But you know, just to remind you that we're all coming looking at the Reformation from different faith backgrounds. But you know, it's also quite a good YouTube series as well on the history of it. What would you recommend? I know you were talking about a YouTube documentary.
Oh yes, I still haven't found that one.
Oh,
I once stumbled across a show on TV, and it was a historian, and he was following a map done in the 15th century, and so in England, in the West Country, and so it was before King Henry VIII dissolved all the monasteries, closed them all down, and so he's trying to follow this old map to see whether he could still get to the destination down in Cornwall, and he was finding that the landscape had been changed by the Reformation. And I found that really fascinating that, you know, just the geography of the place was changed because monasteries, there was no need for a fishing hole anymore by a monastery. So they fill it in for pastoral land for cows. But I still haven't found it, but I'm still looking for that. I thought it was quite an interesting documentary. If you want something that's not bite-sized, but something you could just do it in your own time. Dominic Steele down at Village Church in Annandale, he put together a documentary series, and it's four parts, and he looks at 4 of the solas of the Reformation, which apparently we're not giving away yet, but you might.
We're allowed
anyway.
to get about 30 seconds when we do our mind map.
Yeah. And he looks at, and he does like a Reformation history course, and it's really, really well done and really engaging as well. So that you can, you might be able to find shorts on YouTube, but you can get it through Matthias Media, and yeah. But I'll bring ideas for resources. I've got a great book in this box that is, I think, a fantastic read on a whole lot of areas from what we're looking at in the Reformation, and I'll discuss that at the end. But yeah.
Any further questions on learning styles or how you guys prefer to learn?
I'm a reader. But what I will read, read some of the stuff in the Reformation. I think it's important to read secular books about the Reformation.
Yes, and also I think it's really good to read.
Histories out there.
Yeah, I think we need to realise this is history, and therefore we're actually approaching this from a historian perspective. So we want to make sure that we're not being clouded. We are focusing on a particular narrow channel of following, following through some particular ideas. And a really interesting book, if you are interested in history of that, I would highly recommend this great little read, The Reformation in the Cities, which is the appeal of Protestantism in 16th century Germany and Switzerland. It covers all the main historians at the time of writing by Stephen Osmond, and it critiques its historiography, which is the understanding. So just switch your brain off if you're not interested in historiography. That is the understanding of how history works. So this person is critiquing very secular and non-secular historians' ideas on the Reformation, and just gives you a fabulous zip through how people throughout the last 400 years have seen the Reformation. So it's a really good read. I really enjoyed it. I also know my taste in reading isn't the same as everybody else's. I took that to book group with Helen, and everyone looked at me like I needed to get a life. Okay, well, we are now going to start with our first mind map.
Okay, so Vanessa's going to scribe, and I'm just basically going to ask, what are things that we know of from the Reformation that might be just something you've heard, but you know nothing about it? And we're just going to put up a board of our current understanding, and then at the end, we might even look back and just see how those things filled out more, or what things have been added, what would we change about what we once put on the board. So I guess Luther. Oh, good on you. Jump in first. Get Luther.
Everyone's thinking Luther, but no one's saying it.
Is it commonly accepted that Luther was sort of the instigator? I mean, separately on God's cause or something like that? Or
a first cause?
Well, first cause in the sense that his idea started making everybody else question things. So.
Yeah, okay. So Unit 2, you look at Martin Luther, and so is he the first cause in the Reformation?
It's usually when you have a course like this, you always start with him, that's all.
That is why. The next week will explain why we are not starting with Luther.
Well, I was listening to this, go on, Jackie.
2020, walking tour through Prague, we were shocked to find out that Luther wasn't the first one.
That's right.
It was Juan Hus.
Horse was the Hussites, yes.
Yeah.
And the other, I was actually listening to a podcast about Henry IV. And it reminded me about the Lollards.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that Lollard was also
Concept.
very much, they were looking at some things that sort of evolved more with Martin Luther. But they said there were certainly groups of people, as far as I can say, Hussites are one of them. He was burnt to the stake, wasn't he? Yeah.
But I'm just saying with Luther, it happened because, it seemed to happen because of the printing press.
Yeah, that's right. And
People disseminated his ideas more
that's
widely.
right. That's
He
a
also
really good point.
protected
Now.
too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's really good. Like, why do we remember Luther but not Jan Hus? Or is there anyone else earlier that had some reforming ideas?
Yeah.
We're gonna have two guys who, Wycliffe and John Calvin.
Yeah,
Wycliffe, yeah.
He was a Lollard, wasn't he?
Well, the Lollards were followers of Wycliffe.
That's right.
Yeah. There was some. They went off on a tangent a little
That's
bit,
right,
but yeah.
most of these things.
Calvin, yeah.
So the concept of humanism,
Humanism.
I think I'd like you to define what that used to mean, because we all know what it means now. It means man is the center of the universe, etc. But back then it meant something else.
It was
I think
different.
it's
Yeah,
changed.
it certainly was different.
And that's Erasmus.
Erasmus, that's right.
Erasmus,
Erasmus,
yeah.
yeah. He was a human, wasn't he?
Yes.
It had a lot more of a religious context.
It's about truth. wasn't it?
Primary sources.
Using your, but I think it was about intellect, wasn't it?
Yeah. So this week, as you look at the preceding time leading up to Martin Luther, is to think about how did humanism play a role in the Reformation kicking off. And again, I'm not saying it started there necessarily, but it certainly kicked off. It certainly took off. Other things, other people. Zwingli. Ulrich Zwingli. Okay. Do we know our nations were a bit different there, like borders and what we understand as like nations, but if we were going to put them in nations, where would we put Luther?
Germany.
German?
Well, one of the German states,
Yes.
because Germany didn't exist.
Yeah, no, but if we're going to like say what language did he speak, and yeah,
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
But also, that sort of umbrella thing, the Holy Roman Empire.
yes, yep, and yep. So Holy Roman Empire. We'll learn more about that in Unit 1. Ulrich Zwingli, do we know whereabout he was situated in the modern world? In Switzerland, yeah.
Switzerland wasn't a country either, it
No.
was
It's
a
cantons,
canton,
yeah.
so it's called the Swiss cantons, but we do mean Switzerland like modernly today.
Does anyone know how Zwingli died?
He was fighting in war, wasn't he? Wasn't he fighting in a war and he got killed?
Yeah.
Because he believed it was okay to fight in wars.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't have much choice. All Swiss young men in those days were mercenaries, basically enslaved to the Catholic Church. So he was a not by choice mercenary.
Is that where the Swiss guard come from?
Yes.
Ah,
I know, honestly, I would be ashamed if I was
There
to
we go.
based on their background.
Ah.
Yeah,
um,
however, yeah.
Jan Hus, where was he?
Well, we learned about him in Prague.
Prague, yeah.
Prague.
Czech, was he?
Czech.
Yeah, but they'll talk about him as part of Bohemia.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so,
That was that part of the Holy Roman Empire too?
yes,
Yeah.
it's, and what happened to Jan Hus plays into what we see happen to Luther when he starts to get called to councils. And you think, what happened to Jan Hus? Well, maybe be a bit more careful. And Erasmus, I know he's Yeah, Dutch. And John Calvin,
Swiss, French, Swiss.
you're both correct.
Yeah.
He's French.
He's a French speaking Switzerland, wasn't he?
Yeah, so he was born in France,
Yeah.
but he spent a lot of time in Geneva and also Strasbourg, and but yeah, mainly associated with Geneva and Switzerland. Any others?
Where's Wycliffe?
Do we have some more concepts here? We've got some.
Oh,
Is it-
yeah,
where
the
Wycliffe, oh, we haven't got,
concepts.
how about where Wycliffe, where was Wycliffe?
Oh, it was English, wasn't it? English.
Yeah.
What's the name?
There was a lot of go between in those days between England and France. They weren't exactly still seeing themselves as separate, but we'll just make it, let's just claim him thing.
We haven't mentioned, what's his name? Knox.
John Knox.
That's what we do.
We're going to come and look at, you have to save him to the end.
Yeah.
You'll be having a good look at John Knox. Where was Knox?
Scotland.
It's like the second and third generation of reformers here. Covering time.
So we got the monarchy somewhere in there too.
Monarchy. Okay, so the
Monarchies.
monarchies. Yeah. So
Oh, hang on, I might make a different colour for that because I might make that black because they're more like, oh, no, pretty pressing is the thing. I need another colour.
red.
Okay, so they're not really a concept, are they, monarchies? They are more like a government thing, and government is really important
The rise of
in
nation states.
this story.
Yeah.
So
So
governmental
maybe
systems.
that's monarchies and government.
Because they're becoming more powerful.
Government systems, yeah, governmental systems is actually also really important in what was going on here too. This is getting very messy.
Is trade part of the issue with this as well? Because we've got the printing press and, you know, information going out.
Put it up.
It's all that type of stuff.
Definitely. Particularly the production of Bibles.
Well, the gospel, as we know from early church history, is it seems to follow progress. So stuff like
Yeah.
Also, the ideas.
Economic upheavals, which caused people disruption and gave them a chance to think. Like what happened to Spain and Portugal with the influx of gold from the New World?
Yes, so we'll put trade and economic uncertainties, probably is the best thing, like it was that was a time of big economic change. There was a lot of rise of the middle class and
I think that's important.
Geez, look, yes, yeah. Yeah, so there was a lot of new money, there were a lot of people rising and falling, and there were a lot of people who suddenly had a bit more leisure time to start thinking about things. So I'm very surprised that we haven't mentioned something that I would have thought was really obvious for anyone, especially been on a history tour of England or anywhere in Europe.
empires.
Sorry?
Empires.
Oh, we might get there. Joan, you had something that you really
You went
enjoyed
heavy
doing
on
at
the
PTC.
Oh, well, the worship, how.
Prayer book?
Yeah.
Prayer book.
Okay, so
So the monasteries.
Yeah, prayer books. Prayer books.
Something that
Monasteries.
what's said here about the trade and economy, the great middle class, the merchants,
Oh,
weren't they instrumental in the production of Bibles,
yes, yeah.
particularly getting them across to smoke them in England?
Yeah. So
From, what are they called?
have we got Bible printing as a
Oh, yeah.
thing?
Press, yep.
Printing.
It's right down here, Bible printing. And
Indulgences. in it?
yes.
Yeah,
the
okay.
Catholic Church.
This is a mind map. We can put it.
Holy
Yeah.
Roman
Bit of wheel
Empire.
up.
I'm just with Bibles, I was just saying pamphlets. Just want to talk about pamphleteering as well, we'll be coming across those as well.
There's an H missing as well from that.
Oh, for goodness sake,
Sorry,
it's
but
my fault.
but a pamphlet.
Pamphlet. All those tall letters are not getting, okay, that's just
We're
pamphlet.
going too quick.
Right, we're back at indulgences.
Oh, yeah, well, the
Mm.
one
It's
thing that I
basically a
noticed,
Catholic Church.
oh,
Well, all of
Yes,
it was the
it-
Catholic
That's
Church.
right, it's all the same
So
church.
yes,
there wasn't,
yes, I
yeah,
suppose that part, the bit that I detested, I guess, in Europe was particularly along the Rhine and the Danube, was looking at all these bishops' palaces with all their gold and thinking about all the slaves that they had to do that and the oppression there must have been for the working class. These people just enriching themselves for the sake of, I've got a better looking palace than he's got.
Has anyone been to Vatican City and gone
Oh,
to
yes.
St. Peter's Basilica?
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll pay for that.
Well, the indulgences, yeah.
What about the threat from the east?
Oh, very
yeah, yes.
So that goes back to the Crusades.
But also the rise of the Ottomans and
The Moors
And
coming
more
from,
invasion.
is that right? You're the history, not but coming up through Spain.
the
Like Spain was,
the Moors came up through Spain
yeah.
and took on the Frankish kingdom and finally got stopped. That's where Charlemagne came into the picture.
Yeah.
So people were probably, quite, not frightened so much, but on edge, very tense. It's a very tense time where you don't know if you're gonna be invaded or not.
Well, from the east, it was the Ottomans.
We're also putting ourselves in that time,
Mm.
like, if those things happen today, we'd know about it in a minute. Like, it'd be on the news.
Yeah.
Whereas what would the average person know about the world outside their village? Completely different world. This mind map is getting really full. The photo's I'll take a half-time photo.
You mean we're only halfway there?
I think about it. So I've tried to go black is object, things, actual things. Purple is ideas or concepts or, yeah. The red is governmental systems, trade economics, the sort of the things that were affecting the flow of movement ideas. Orange is people. I don't know why I did green for Lola. They should be purple. That's, yeah. And the blue is any place. That's what's happening. Lollards are just green. I don't know why.
Are there a group of people in this? Oh,
It should be purple. It's an idea. It was an idea. Yeah.
Are we happy with that for a pre-course mind map? At the end of it, I'm sure you'll be able to add a million more things. You'll have all these new names that you've come across. You'll have names that you come across and go, I knew that before. I should have put it on the first one. But you'll not only have the words, but you'll have more of a deeper understanding of each of those areas. And some of the areas may not get covered much in this course. That's okay. But hopefully by the end you'll go, I've learnt a lot.
I think pretty much every word on there is going to pass your mind somewhere in the next couple of months.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to just look forward to the unit for this week. Are there any questions so far that people want to ask that we've just been sitting on and haven't found the right time, but this is the right time?
I mean, I guess the challenge I always see with this stuff is we get caught up in hidden history. The question is how much we see God over the top of it all.
Yeah.
And that's orchestrating things.
Yeah.
So that's why we're keen, after our looking back, we'll be doing like a short Bible study on what the Bible actually says about the concepts that people were coming up against in what we've just done in the past unit, so that we can then come in our modern minds and look at what the Bible says and say, would we come to the same conclusions or not? We'll be looking at those sort of reflection of how that is adapted to our modern world. It's difficult to do today so much, but if you really wanted to go and get a really good heads up, I would suggest going home and reading Romans 6 to 8. That would cover you with new ideas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this week you're going to be looking at the medieval background to the Reformation, and this is a great unit to orient you to what the environment was like. Why did the Reformation take off at the time it did? Why didn't it happen like centuries earlier? Why did it happen then? And this unit will help get our minds into what was going on the eve of Martin Luther. We'll say that as the point of reference. So you're going to look at what people's ideas were like back then, what they thought about in terms of their own identity and how they related to God. You're going to see come across the different ideas of how we approach God. How does a person approach God? What is it, and what are the different ideas of understanding God that were coming out during that period? When we talk about this period, we're talking about a pretty large period of time, like centuries before Martin Luther came on the scene. But what were the different ways people were trying to understand God, understand faith, and understand those things? So we come into contact with the scholastics, who were a lot about the mind and trying to think with reason how to understand and prove the existence of God. We come into contact with mysticism, and they're much more to do with the heart, like feeling and experiencing God, and monasticism, which is much more about the hands, like actually obeying and doing good. All these ways of not just understanding God, but understanding how to be on the right side of God. That's the theology side of things, but then we've got the governmental side of things, which you'll read about as well. So what were the governments like? What were the nations like on the eve of Reformation? We look at the Pope and the power of the Pope and his relationship with civil governments. So we get to see emperors and kings and princes, and how each of them is jockeying for power.
So can I then just ask, the reference to the Holy Roman Empire, is that an acknowledgement of the papal position in the context of the Roman Empire? Is that where we add that word holy into the Roman reference?
I think there are a few things going on there with that particular title. One was that they came up with the system of the Holy Roman Empire because they had this, to us very strange, but not to them, belief that they were still the Roman Empire. So you might remember back in early church history, Rome actually split into two halves, and all this Reformation stuff has nothing to do with the Eastern Orthodox churches at all. They were still happily doing their own thing. This is only to do with the Roman Church, which is the Rome side of the Roman Empire, where the Roman Empire split into two halves, right? Now, the people here, even though this is a solid nearly 1,000 years later, they are still believing they are still Rome. There was a new idea of really wanting to be, we are the Holy Roman Empire, we're the new Constantine, because of the Moorish invasions coming up. So the North Africa, the Islamic people of North Africa were gradually creeping all the way up to Lyon in France. If you've ever been there, that's how far they got, and that's where it stopped. And they had taken over and were governing that southern part of Spain, Portugal, places like that, as Islamic states. So they were, the Holy Roman Empire thing was like a stand up and say, no, 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 we're Christians. And then on top of that, they were using papal authority to enforce their position. So we're the holy ones. You want to do what I'm told, or threat of hellfire. It was a very effective form of government that filtered down through many levels, which you learn about in that thing. So I hope that covered the answer for you.
Yeah. And in the prophets, the Roman Empire was the last empire. And so it was a continuation of what had been spoken about in the Bible. Like, well, this is it. And it gave a lot of military might to the Pope. We look at the relationship between the Pope and the Church, and one of the I've got a few questions that we don't need to answer today, but just questions that might get you thinking as you read, and I'll read them in a moment. And so on the eve of the Reformation, you've got some of the economic and trade things happening, the printing press, and you'll just see how the environment is actually it's become fertile soil ready for ideas to get out there, and for people to hear those ideas, and for change to happen. So I don't want to give too much away in that, but has anyone got any questions about Unit 1? You might have already read it if you've got the book.
Circle back to scholasticism.
Sure.
Like, we're so used to that word, scholastic books or whatever, and we generally think of it like, oh yes, so that's academic and that is good. At the time, just before the Reformation, the way that that truth was positioned was whatever the latest scholastic person said. So St. Thomas Aquinas was a great scholastic scholar who went to great lengths to write down everything about theology he could collect from the early church fathers onwards into one work of everything you should ever believe. Didn't really cross-reference the Bible terribly much, because it was more important to people to look at what other people thought about the Bible than what the Bible actually said. So over hundreds of years, you ended up with scholastics at the time of, say, the 1400s, which is where we're really covering. We're ducking in at the 1400s pretty much here. But in the centuries before then, if someone else had said it recently, that was really good. And if you could cross-reference it with someone said a bit earlier than them, that was what was true. Which brings us back to the concept of a community of truth. Your ideas come from the community, not from an objective source. So what somebody said about the Bible was more important than what it said in the Bible. And if you just think about Chinese whispers, that can take you a very long way, that game, away from your original premise. So I just wanted to say that about scholasticism. It wasn't necessarily bad. There were people who were keen believers in Jesus, but this is where they had ended up because of a lack of objectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everyone's like a product of their time as well. So they're doing what they were doing, like what smart people were doing in that time. And so had Thomas Aquinas been around a bit later, who knows? He might have been a Luther. Who knows? But they're all like bricks in the building of history up until the Reformation. Here are some questions to consider, and I might email these out. You don't have to think about these, but I found these helpful in reading through the topic, and I don't expect you to remember them right now. But as you read it, think about, how does the pre-Reformation scene lead to the Reformation? So how is each topic one of those bricks? Think about what defines the church. Before what we call the Reformation, what defines the church? What do people say the church is? What would the Pope say the church is? What would the Holy Roman Emperor say the church is? What would the average person say the church is? Where does authority lie? I find this a big one. Where is authority? Where is truth? Like, who is the one who gets to decide what is right? What is the right way of doing things? What is the right way of thinking about things? And you'll see the battle for authority in regards to who has power in the church.
See, that's a pilot comment. I agree that that's pilot to a T, you know, what is true?
What is true? Yeah, yeah. Well, who has the power in this chapter? Is it the Pope? Is it the church councils? Is it the civil leaders? Who has the authority and what authority do they have? How do people know God? How do people get to know God? How is a person saved? So different ideas of how someone gets to heaven. What is the relationship between salvation and the church? So is the church essential for salvation? How does the church have power over salvation? Does it just claim to have power over salvation? And the person's identity as part of the church. How would you summarise the key issues on the eve of the Reformation? If you were going to say to someone, right before Martin Luther kicked up a storm, these are three things that were happening that meant that his ideas spread. What would you say about that? But I also think it's really helpful as you go through each topic is to do some personal reflection about for each of the topics. And so I think questions like, what have you taken for granted in your 21st century, that's the right century, isn't it? 21st century Christian faith, your sense of identity, your part in a church, congregation, church family, your place in a nation as a citizen. What have you taken for granted that this unit has made you appreciate or made you realise that you just haven't thought about before? And that's something to ask every week. And then lastly, are there any things in the 21st century Australian church? Are we all part of Lower Mountains Anglican Parish?
Springwood County.
Springwood's almost like.
Okay. So what are there any things in the 21st century Australian church that resemble some of the problems of the late medieval or the problems that were being confronted in each unit we do? So we actually start to think, well, is this a bit like what we're doing or what we see in the current church scene? So that we can say, well, how do we guard ourselves from just falling into the same error? So there, I'll send them out, and if they're helpful, great, use them. But if not, you can ignore them. Fine.
Can I also say too, the place of Israel taking on board the Bible, you know, it being printed around this time, the Jews physically weren't in any location. Am I right in saying that? They weren't as a nation, plonked as in my lifetime they are today.
Yeah.
But they're just a group of people that are dispersed amongst all the.
They did also live in Jerusalem and that area.
They're in that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes,
However,
so
they weren't identified.
No, they absolutely identified and practiced as Jewish people in that area at that time. But they were not that stage. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was ruled by an Islamic caliphate.
And if you think about Merchant of Venice, there were people around merchants and what have you around Europe. Moneylenders, yes.
There'd been a Jewish diaspora back in the Roman Empire.
Yes, I mean, it does sort of bring in an equation though of how people understood who the Jews were as a special people.
I honestly think there was so little concept of them reading the Bible that it would not have crossed most people's minds at all. Yeah, when you see how much the Bible was used and the percentages, we're going to come across some of that next week when we look at Luther, the percentages of priests who could read full stop. Yes, that's just, yeah, well, quite small. Yes, let alone read a Bible. So in any language they could understand. No, not in England anyway. But in England, it was very small.
The Bible's really that.
Oh, yes, I was saying they couldn't read Latin, let alone in any language they could actually understand. Yeah, they were trained to sing the Latin masses, but they didn't necessarily know what the words were.
Yeah, we've done that in Scotland.
So I don't know that
Same
people were thinking of the Jewish people in any way, shape or form when any of this stuff was happening.
Luther was, wasn't he?
We'll
Yes,
talk more about Luther next week.
next week. No. Next week and the week after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just in case anyone's wondering, Luther was a deeply problematic person you probably didn't want to invite round for dinner. Let's just leave it right there. And
Yeah, unless you got plenty of beer on stock.
lots of beer,
Yeah.
and he didn't mind a bit of really rough abuse if I did. Yeah.
But each of the people we'll come across, we look back and we think that we look at all the good stuff that they did and the things that we're thankful for. But we need to remember each person is a sinner who's only saved by grace. And so we're going to, like, as you look at each person, depending on how deep you go, you will see some rough edges. They all have rough edges. They all have areas where, like, we sit now and go, oh, they compromised there. And of course, we're not talking about the areas we compromise personally. And so each person is a flawed human being, but God's used them. And so, yeah, Luther, you'll be shocked by what he did. Cranmer, you'll be shocked by, things that he was part of, and Calvin, and all of them. Just like they would be shocked at the things that we do and the things that we've done in the past.
We were talking about the Jews a little while ago. When you spoke about scholasticism, how you keep going back to what the latest academic said, rather than searching the scriptures. If you listen to what Jewish people today say, they're much more about what the latest rabbi has written, not about Moses. Yeah. And if you look at the continuing revelation, particularly what we get in the Bible, you can see how they're never getting back to it. They're just growing on from where they left off when they killed Jesus.
Yes, scholasticism is something that people do, and we do, for example, science. Modern science is based on scholasticism. That's why I said before, we've got to be really careful. They're not goodies and baddies in this course. We're not the sides of, there's some evil. We're going to actually see some evil, and there are a few things that I've read in the primary sources, and boy, am I not going to read them to you. One of them's given me bad dreams. And that wasn't just burning people at the stake. But none of these people in orange are saint whoever, because nobody in their right mind would canonize these people as having led a blameless life of great example for us to follow. And yet all of these people in orange are people that we can take a look at and go, wow, well, that is a great example to follow in this particular area. These people were ordinary people used by God to bring about great change that was desperately needed, which is, where we're going.
I've just got a Bible passage to get our heads into Unit 1. So can we all turn to Matthew 16? We're going to go to verse 13. So Matthew 16, 13. It's a little bit hard to think of a passage to reflect on today, because we're looking at an era where the Bible was not really highly regarded. In the weeks to come, we'll have some concepts that will be able to go to what Scripture says, just like the Reformers went to Scripture to see what the Scripture said. But today, we're going to read might be quite a familiar event to some. But would someone like to read it? And we're going to go to verse 20.
I can do that. 13 or 20.
13, 20.
Thanks, Alan.
Oh. So Matthew 16, right?
Yes.
When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any thoughts about what in that reading might relate to what we're going to look at from the preview that I just gave, the imperfect preview?
Papal authority.
Papal authority. Yeah.
On this
Yeah,
rock.
on this rock. Yeah,
Keys of heaven stuff.
the keys of heaven.
Every picture we saw in every museum and church and cathedral, Peter, he's got keys in my head.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to see the papal office as seeing themselves as a continuation of Peter, the Apostle Peter, claiming an unbroken line of passing the baton on from Peter to so on and so on and so on, and the Pope being in line. You're going to see some problems with that in Unit 1. You're going to see, well, yeah, there's a bit of an issue. Don't give away too much, but a bit of an issue of claiming that direct line. But the keys of the kingdom was a really important aspect to the papal authority, was to have that power on earth to bind people or to loose people, to bind them in their sin or to loose them from their sin. So that's something that just carried through into the period we're looking at in the Reformation. Are there any, and of course, we probably have a different understanding of what it means that Jesus is saying, "On this rock, I'll build my church." We're not going to go into that today because we're going to see over the course how apostolic succession is thought about and what Jesus actually might mean there rather than a direct line from Peter. Are there any questions, thoughts?
I'm just thinking I'm going to have to go back and look through all that early church history to see whether, that thought about until Constantine, the church was persecuted, and then it had, it changed. And I'm just thinking, if I got to read through, should I read through that just to find out what sort of and there were just so many different bishops but I don't know that they held the Bishop of Rome any higher at times than any of the other bishops.
That's right. In the early church, they didn't necessarily hold the Bishop of Rome any higher.
No.
But at the beginning of the first few paragraphs of the notes, they're going to give you like a short recap, heads up.
Yeah.
And remember, we're actually at that time, the early church history course finishes around 400.
Yeah.
We're skipping in here at 1400. So Doctor Who noise is here 1,000 years later. Here we are. And we're going to see what a few things that got cemented in along the way. Should they have been cemented on? That verse that Phil just read, when Jesus said, "Who do you say I am?" I think that is really the question of this entire course. Jesus asking, "Who do you say I am?" Of course, he already knows who he is. He doesn't need us to tell us who he is. But who do you say I am? We are the ones who need to get that right.
Laura, we're at 2:30, so this is pretty much the usually it'll be like the turn off lights and everyone can go. But I'm gonna hang around for a little bit. I was gonna show you a book.
Would you give us the most important one, so you made sure it was there?
That's right. I loaded it first. This one here, Celebrating the Reformation, and it's put out by Moore College, and it was put out on the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther. I'm not going to tell you what he did, just in case you haven't read that unit yet, and it's all fresh for you. But
Not Facebook.
it's not Facebook. Yeah.
Be here next week to find out. We're going to have a bit of a reenactment.
The great thing about this book is each chapter is basically an essay written by someone who's an expert or very knowledgeable. And you look at the characters of the Reformation. One of my favourites was Catherine Zell. You don't hear much about female reformers. And this chapter talks about her influence within the Reformation, particularly letters that she wrote, her care for exiles who had to leave their cities, and then you've got chapters on the doctrines and then some reflections chapters. So like what do we do with what happened at the Reformation now? So that would be my pick of a book to get. Celebrating the Reformation, its legacy and continuing relevance. And I don't know where you can buy it from, but I'm sure if you search on Google, you'll be able to find it. You can come and have a quick scan of that if you want.
We could just ask a volunteer to pray for source. We go out this week and study, and then if you want to come and look at anything we've got, ask us any personal questions, clear anything up.
Not any personal question.
Oh, sorry, I meant your questions, your individual questions, not personal. We can't be answering personal questions. Okay, would somebody like to pray for us? I'm not making. I've got to take one nice volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
I was just about to tell you that he's our volunteer.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah. Heavenly Father, we just thank you that we can meet together and speak about this time in history. And we pray, Father, as we do that, that you would guide us. Help us, Lord, to listen to your voice and to be reading our Bibles, that we might really seek your truth. Lord, we thank you for Vanessa and for Phil and for the knowledge that they have and their willingness to share it with us. And we just pray that this week, as we read, that you would, give us lots of insight and questions. Back next week, safely. Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you.